Our intended outcome for this video is to provide an overview of student learning objectives that you can learn the process and then implement with your teachers. For our purposes, this is strictly an overview. Next month, we will dive into how to set power standards, and then from here on out, take you step by step through the process. So in your pre-assessment, I asked you what the difference was between an instructional objective and student learning objective. And I think this is an important conversation to have because oftentimes teachers get confused, educators get confused about the definitions that we are using when we discuss instructional and curriculum. So I have a list of words or phrases up on the screen right now, and from essential questions to instructional objectives, I can statements, student learning objectives, all of these phrases are used consistently when we are designing our units of instruction. So here's the big difference. The big difference is this. Instructional outcomes are for teachers. They are used to set based off the standards, their objectives for each lesson, for each unit of design. Student learning objectives are meant to be for the students, which is why I also asked you during your pre-assessment what the intended purpose of student learning objectives is. Student learning objectives are just that. They're for the student. It's meant to engage them, make them part of the process, and as a result, we have started to use it more for teacher evaluation, and it's losing its purpose. So that's why I had you read the article about data-driven instruction versus data-informed instruction, because I feel there's a big difference. So as we go through this process, you'll find that learning targets are also part of the student learning objective process. They are the I can statements. Okay, so student learning objectives are written in student language, helps the student understand the purpose, is actually measured by the student, and is used consistently among staff. I'm going to actually have you read this this article, Knowing Your Learning Target, a little bit later in the course when we start working on power standards and I can statements. So many states are giving SLOs a bad name. We're going to talk a little bit about MDE's purpose as this course goes on, but unfortunately, they are getting a bad name for the wrong reasons. You can use them to show student growth. I'm not going to deny that by any means, and our state actually has a website dedicated to this, but it's not the primary reason they were developed, and we need to keep that in the back of our mind. So here's what the process looks like. Step 1, you need to identify power standards. Once you have this power standards selected, you're going to break it down into the I can or I will statements, which are also known as learning targets. Then you want to start with the end in mind and think about assessments. You have your pre-assessments and your post-assessments. And we're going to talk about some assessment literacy when we get to those sections. And then finally, measuring student learning objectives with the students and what that looks like. So I had you read data-driven article, and part of that article is something I disagreed with. They said students really shouldn't partake in the data discussion, and I actually completely disagree with that. I think that if done correctly, there's some power behind that process, and hopefully you'll get that out of this course so you can help your teachers get there as well. So let's take a look at the origins of this process. So back in the day, we would complete what we were told to, learn what was given to us, only ask questions when needing help, and we had encyclopedias. I do remember distinctly going to the library and going through the card catalog, and it was a lot about factual memorization. The 21st century student's a little bit different, and the reason why we say this is because they literally have all the answers on their fingertips, through their phones, through their iPads, through their laptops and Chromebooks. Students oftentimes don't even question the content, except they want to question us regarding why they need to know it. Why do we need to know it? These kiddos need a GPS in essence, and that's what student learning objectives are meant to do, is to provide them with that GPS. So the first step in the process is power standards, and there's a very distinct process for power standards that we're going to go over next month. And it's taking a look at readiness, endurance, and leverage. Those are 3 key components when selecting power standards. So power standards doesn't mean you teach all of the standards. It's which ones you get the biggest bang for your buck. And using a process of looking at readiness, endurance, and leverage will allow you to really narrow down to the importance of what your teacher should be teaching. So readiness is this idea that it'll get them ready for the next grade level or the next level of instruction, that essential piece of knowledge. Endurance are standards that provide students with skills that go beyond that single day or that single topic. And leverage. This is about using and providing knowledge and skills that could be used in multiple disciplines. What we're finding, especially when kids take the SAT, is that they really struggle with the concept that science, math, social studies, and English are all interconnected. So typically, when you select your power standards, you want to engage in discussion to have no more than 10 power standards for any given content area in any given year. And you're also going to want to conduct a vertical alignment activity, which we'll show you how to do next month. Once you have your power standards, you can start setting up your learning targets. And this is what really provides students with a GPS in regards to what exactly you want them to do. So here's an example of 6th grade math. And as you can see, here's the Common Core standard for numeracy. And fluently add, subtract, multiply, and divide multi-digit decimals using the standard algorithm for each operation. As an English teacher, I have no idea what that just said. However, if I break it down to I can statements, and you take a look at these ones, I'll give you a few seconds. It still doesn't make any sense, does it? That's because this specific example is a poor example of how to take standards and put them into learning targets. Simply what was done was they broke apart the standard and put I can in front of it. Not the best method. Here's another example with ELA. Determine a theme or central idea of a text and analyze its development over the course of the text. Provide an objective summary of the text. Once again, broken down, but simply put I can in front of it. These actually were taken from Teachers Pay Teachers. So as your teachers go through this process or as you instruct them through this process, just be leery of some of the poorly written learning targets for student learning objectives that are out there. So, what was missing? What was bad about them? They didn't provide specifics or products, as I like to say. So with social studies, this is using our current standards, distinguish among and explain the reasons for regional differences in colonial America. As you can see, there's some very distinct products or activities, student learning activities involved here. And what you got to be careful. There's a fine line with how we word these. You don't want to walk into a classroom and see a student's learning objective or learning target say, I will read chapter 1. I will complete worksheet 3. That's an agenda for the day. Learning targets, which are part of the student learning objective process, are a little bit more defined and specific in regards to what is the end result. What do I have to learn and how am I going to show that I learned it? I can locate the New England, Middle, and Southern colonies on a map. I can list the similarities and differences of daily life in 3 colonies. I can write, I can define, I can describe, all of which provide some distinction as to what the student has to learn and what they're going to produce. Let's look at another sample. Here's science, waves, and energy. Waves have energy and transfer energy when they interact with matter. Examples of waves include sound waves, systemic waves, waves on water, and light waves. If you look at these science I can statements, take a look and read them. I can identify, I can write, I can complete a lab, and explain. all which provide the students with specifics as to what they are going to have to complete and demonstrate mastery of. So once you have your power standards, and then you set your learning targets, then you need to think about pre and post tests. Pre-assessments, why do you need them? You need to make sure that they're not watered down versions of the post test. You do not want to overuse or grade them. Most of you have this correct. You want to score them because it's informational based. We're hoping that students show growth. They should show growth. It does not have to be just multiple choice. I think this is where a lot of teachers struggle. Any sort of pre-assessment or sample of student work that gives teachers information as to their students' ability and knowledge before the learning begins is a pre-assessment. Should contain prerequisites as well as new skills. And most importantly, the teachers need to use the data. And this is where they're data-informed versus data-driven. They need to set out their classroom and individualize student learning objectives if needed based on this data. They need to learn to skip and lightly touch on what the students already know, and it should be formative by nature. Post-assessments, on the other hand, should be tied to student learning objectives in the pretest data. It can be used to show growth for both the teacher and the student, summative by nature, can be used for celebrations, and most importantly, feedback. But I think the biggest concern that teachers struggle with is what do you do if a student doesn't meet the learning objectives on the summative? That's a challenging one. If you set a specific target or learning objective and the students do not reach it, that can be difficult as to what your next steps are. So you also need to know that student learning objectives were originally designed for students to track their progress. And we'll talk more about this, but this is kind of what it would look like in the classroom. As you can see, there's no grades. It's a question. The specific I can statements are at the bottom. So once again, if you look at these I can statements, I can answer questions, I can determine, I can describe, I can determine, I can retell. So it's very specific as to what the child needs to do. Here's what it would look like if you had them do it privately. Another example, a math teacher's dream of how a student can track their pre-assessment and their post-assessment. Okay. So one of the things that I think needs to be mentioned as well is that as students go through this process, conferring with the student and making sure that conversations are had throughout. So formative assessments play a really, really, really important role in this process. Sorry, I skipped a slide. The formative assessment is not just for the teacher. It's one of those things where you collect that feedback, and there's so many ways you can do a formative assessment, that you collect that feedback and you know where your students are at, but a lot of times the teachers then don't provide that feedback to the students, and that is a huge part of this process. They need to learn to confer with students. Go over, okay, here's where you at, here's where you are at, here's where you need to be, what can we do to get there? It's the art of one-on-one. And it's not about telling the child what they did wrong, but where they're at and where they need to go. The problem is when do you make time for this? And it's how you design your classroom in regards to small group work, large group work, flexible grouping, and it should always occur after those formative assessments. Now, one thing we will talk about is the fact that students can track their progress. I have a number of samples from anywhere from tracking forms to weekly reflection to goal setting, even yearly setting. Okay, and we'll go through that process step by step. So kind of the way it's laid out is power standards, I can, I will statements. We're going to spend a lot of time on assessment, pre and post assessments, to the development of, the literacy of, understanding them, how to write good ones. formative assessment. We are also going to talk about how students can track their process and what teachers need to do in their classroom. And then finally, the impact on educator evaluation, because I think that's a really important part too. So throughout the year, you'll be going through a number of activities in the classroom, the Google Classroom. So after watching this video, for example, I will be posting an activity for you to complete. So each session will have a comment, question that you need to post on. There'll be a video, and then there'll be some sort of activity following that video. So you can look forward to that coming up next. If you have any questions, you can contact me at my email address, and we might throw in a Twitter chat throughout the year to see how things are going.